International flights in and out of Israel have been halted for another 2 weeks, with the airport closure extended as mutant strains of COVID continue their rapid spread. Mass protests in Arab cities around Israel as demonstrators are out in the thousands, denouncing police for not doing enough to protect them. And reports are coming in that US President Joe Biden is convening the National Security Council to work out just how to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Hello, I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for joining me here on the news desk. Well, let's begin this edition right here in Israel with the current nationwide lockdown extended by 2 days after an 11th hour decision by the government amid high numbers of coronavirus cases. Well, the current restrictions, which limit the movement of people and keep most businesses shuttered, were supposed to end at 7 a.m. local time Friday, but have now been held over until Sunday. Well, the lockdown is set to be lifted in phases, although there remains a lot of scepticism that the criteria set out in order for restrictions to be lifted just won't be met.
The important thing to remember is that social distancing and lockdowns have a cost, both economic cost, mental health cost, but also a cost in health. So once we think the benefit of lockdown is lower than the cost in health, in mental health, economic cost, then lockdown are no longer useful.
And for more, let's bring in our correspondent, Daniel Semach, who joins us there from Tel Aviv. Hello again, Daniel. Bring us the very latest on exactly what's happening regarding all of these stranded Israelis who can't get home.
Right. Well, that's one issue that is yet to be completely resolved, whether or not the Ben Gurion International Airport will reopen within the next week. There have been, obviously, as is the case with many of the different issues that are under debate, two sides that see on contrary views when it comes to the reopening of the airport. And the most outstanding issue there, Sarah, is the fact that we're still seeing very troubling numbers in Israel. And it does appear as though some of the variants and mutations of the coronavirus have led to the numbers not going down in the way that at least some health professionals would like to have seen, especially as Israel is now at the end of its third lockdown. What we can say is that on Sunday there will be some return to normal, at least for now. That is the expectation, is that there will be some businesses that were previously closed will be allowed to be reopened, mostly those that don't have people from the public coming into the business itself. They might not be deemed essential businesses, but as long as they don't welcome customers, then they'll be allowed to reopen, as well as those businesses that have sort of one-on-one sort of care, whether it be hairdressers and things of that sort. We also know that the national parks and other sort of areas that are open spaces will be reopened to the public on Sunday at 7 in the morning. We can also say, Sarah, that the restriction on movement, that 1,000 meters, is expected to be lifted. And we also know that individuals will be allowed to spend time not only in their own home, but also to visit others. Now, that's just a few of the restrictions that will be lifted on Sunday, but still a long ways to go to understand exactly what the full program is and what the plan is. Maybe the most outstanding issue there is the fact that we don't have a clear understanding on when the education sector, when schools will indeed be reopened. That's an issue that's going to need to be really resolved between the health ministry, within the Israeli government, and of course as well as the education ministry. So these are definitely some issues that have a challenge ahead of them in regards to getting back to normal, and something that certainly has a large impact on the greater population here in Israel. But Sarah, I can tell you from seeing what we saw throughout the day today that the Israeli public has already seemed to prime itself for going back to the out of lockdown phase. Already Friday, as you mentioned, today was supposed to be the first day where the lockdown ended. It wasn't the case officially, but it did seem as though Israelis are starting to break free a little bit and go out and about. We'll see whether or not the police go forward with heavy enforcement over the next day, something that has been done in past several weekends. But we'll see whether or not they take it up a notch, or indeed are maybe a little bit more laxed leading up to the end of what is officially Israel's third lockdown. Again, we'll have to see when it indeed happens. We've seen time and time again that some of these decisions can be stalled, but for now, that is the plan, that Israelis will will be allowed to leave their homes again, and that some of these businesses will be reopened, and restaurants will then again officially be allowed to do things like takeaway, something that we have seen in general anyway, but definitely that will be permitted officially.
All right, and Daniel, regarding this enforcement, a lot of criticism being directed at authorities. We just saw these pictures come up on screen just a moment ago of police in the centre of Tel Aviv telling people to move on, go home, yet the same cannot be said about these mass gatherings in Jerusalem and other places like that.
Yeah, it really depends on the mass gathering. Obviously, there was a lot of criticism towards the Israeli police on not having prevented these mass funerals that we saw earlier this week for two prominent rabbis in the ultra-Orthodox community. There were reports indicating that the police said that they just could not have, once there were already thousands of people gathered for the funeral proceeding, there was very little the police could do without wreaking havoc, you could say, or creating more chaos. And that's really an issue that's going to continue to linger as far as the Israeli police enforcement is concerned. There's been a lot of criticism that there's been a lot of focus on cities like Tel Aviv, where cities like Bnei Brak or certain areas in Jerusalem haven't seen the same sort of enforcement, at least when it comes down to the sheer numbers of fines that have been handed out for people. We've seen a lot of ugly scenes between local residents in certain communities and Israeli police who have really arrived to disperse people or close institutions that weren't allowed to be open. So this is an issue that has persisted, not just after the first lockdown, second lockdown, but now officially also the third lockdown. And we'll see if there are any sort of conclusions that are reached. The Israeli police did open an investigation into the really the circumstances surrounding them not arriving or preventing this mass gathering of the funeral that we saw earlier this week for two rabbis in the same day. Both of those funerals happened in Jerusalem, and both of those funerals had thousands of people attending. And obviously there's going to be a lot of concern, and there should be, regarding the fact that that might have been an outbreak zone, given the fact that we're just looking at such a large group of people gathered in such a close space, Sarah.
Yeah, you're certainly right there, Daniel, and I think it's pretty safe to say a lot of people are looking forward to Sunday. Thank you for the update. Meanwhile, protests are underway once again in the Arab-Israeli city of Umm-el-Fahm in Israel's north, with thousands of angry residents taking to the streets, holding placards and chanting, slamming Israeli police amid a rise in violence and deaths in such communities. Now, many people venting their frustration toward authorities, believing the police are not doing enough to deal with the surge in violent crimes, while others say cops just aren't protecting them. Now, just last week, this particular city was the scene of a violent incident with a 21-year-old man shot and killed as he was making his way home from a protest against violence, while a month ago, the former mayor of the city was shot at close range by armed assailants.
We have been here because we have to shout loudly, and I'm really full of hope that we will get our rights and we will get what we deserve in this government, because no one is doing this for me as a favor. I am a citizen here, an equal citizen like every Israeli here, and no one is doing here for me as a favor that they are giving me some money, some allocation and budget, or giving me a police protection. There is no police protection, and we will get what we want.
Well, it's just been announced that the United Arab Emirates has cut a huge portion of funding to UNRWA, the UN agency which works with Palestinian refugees. The announcement on the back of the UAE's normalisation agreement with Israel, with the Centre for Near East Policy Research revealing that UNRWA was given just $1 million last year compared to more than $50 million it gave each of the 2 years before that. Now, Bahrain is also slashing its funding to the UN group, a move being seen as retaliation after condemnation by Palestinians to the normalisation agreements with Israel. And we do need to go out for a short break, but when we come back, we will continue with our coverage of the coronavirus pandemic, and we'll be joined by a doctor in Austria who has a very important message. All of that and plenty more. Stay with us.